Welcome, everyone. There we go. If you could take your seats, we'll get started. So we won't keep you here all night, but we have some work for you all to do, so I hope you're ready to go. Change the face of Snug Harbor. So I understand there's a seawall meeting this evening, which unfortunately, we're in conflict with that. So the Director of Planning, Valerie Massard, isn't able to introduce this project. So I'll get us started. My name is Darcy Schofield. I'm a Senior Environmental Planner with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and we're here tonight, thank you for coming, to talk about the Snug Harbor Resiliency Plan. So our agenda this evening, we're going to do a little bit of introductions. We're going to do an overview of the project. Josh and I will be working on defining the problem and describing some potential solutions. And then we're going to put you all to work. This is like the one class where we want you to keep your cell phones handy because we'll be doing some cell phone polling. And talk to you about some of the focus group results that we've done earlier this fall. And then we have some additional exercises with the boards throughout the room at the end. So our introduction, sorry, I'm not sure what's happened. So the Metropolitan Area Planning Council is a legislatively designated state agency that provides planning services and technical assistance to 101 communities in the metropolitan area. These are the map. The color portions are our sub-regions, and Duxbury is down at the bottom of our South Shore Coalition region. We've been around providing services for over 50 years, and we have a very wide range of expertise, including environment, economic development, transportation, public health, arts and culture, land use planning, and on, municipal services. So we have a staff of over 100 with a wide range of expertise. And when we work on our climate projects, we really draw on the expertise of our diverse departments to ensure that we're providing a really good solution from a multidisciplinary standpoint. So the staff that are working on this project, you see myself, I'm managing this project. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Josh Fiala. Josh is a principal planner. He is also the lead in your recently completed Envision Duxbury Master Plan, Comprehensive Plan. And then you may have all met Christian in our back, who is our community engagement specialist. Maybe many of you have talked with him on the phone or received an email from him. So he works really hard to ensure we get the greatest reach to ensure your participation really drives the solutions of this. And then I would definitely like to recognize Valerie Massad, the Director of Planning, as part of this project. She is the one who secured the funding for this, so there's no expense to the town associated with this effort. And she's been an excellent project manager and working to move a variety of resilient strategies forward in the town of Duxbury. So this effort is guided by a task force that is we really work to get a very diverse group of individuals with diverse expertise to help guide and inform our process and approach in doing the Snug Harbor Resiliency Plan. So there's a number of our task force members in the audience tonight. Want to recognize JR and Chris and others. So these folks have been really dedicated and really excited to learn more about what the public and the stakeholders for Snug Harbor wants and how they can move forward to create a more resilient place. So I just really love getting pictures of Duxbury. So you'll see lots of pretty pictures. This is one of the best parts of it. So I have to credit Lori Wenham on this with the full moon. It's beautiful. So the Snug Harbor Resilience Study seeks to identify specific and viable long-term solutions to improve resilience and vitality of Snug Harbor. Solutions can only be identified if we clearly define the problem we are trying to solve. And this meeting is a step in the process of defining the problem and choosing the solution. We look at the data, we have conversations, but we really want to try and understand you as a public stakeholder of Snug Harbor really thinks what the problem is and how we can create solutions. So this is the proximate study area, though it is fluid like sea level rise. All right, got a little laugh there. But generally our boundaries are Long Point Marine to the new Island Creek campus, and we're moving up to approximately the topography on Harrison Street. It starts to be a hill, so several houses up. We also go up to Winslow House and the two churches there, because the access to those, even though they're elevated, is really critically important in relationship to Washington Street. But we were definitely pretty fluid in our outreach and approach. The more the merrier involved in this effort. So the scope of this work was to really define some existing conditions. One thing I wanted to mention is I've been working with the Town of Duxbury for over 2 years now, starting with your Climate Vulnerability Assessment and Action Plan that enabled the town to become designated as an MVP community. That designation allows the town to apply for grants towards building resilient strategies. So keep that in mind. The last grant round, the MVP Action Grants, provided $10 million, and there's legislation being considered in the State House right now that would increase that amount significantly. I also worked with the town on their natural hazard mitigation plan, and worked with Josh, who led the Envision Duxbury. And this effort is one of the implementation strategies that came out of a number of those efforts, largely because the community really identified as this is a key component, a real heart of the community, and wanted to protect it. So we looked at we sort of assimilated all those existing conditions from those previous planning studies. We did some really robust community engagement with Christian, making phone calls, sending out letters, sending out emails. And then we hosted 3 focus group charrette meetings. And I'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. And these were really designed to have the stakeholders whose livelihoods are directly impacted by flooding and other issues around Snug Harbor to have very intimate and private conversations and detailed conversations about what Snug Harbor resilience and vulnerability means to them. Right now we have a public online survey that is out. We'd love to have more, so you'll get that URL. And now we're here at Task 4 with a public forum, and we're likely to do a couple of board and commission meetings to, again, solicit feedback and really start to present some of those results. And then we'll be wrapping up with a final report. And this will be integrated into a larger effort. Again, that I'd like to point out Valerie Massard, our town director of planning, has secured a grant with the state to do a more refined and detailed analysis on sea level rise, which will really create a very important prioritization on what structures and infrastructures will be most critically important to protect today, and the probability of the remainder of the sea level rise happening. So this work that we're doing today is going to be integrated into that larger sea level rise study that's happening and ongoing. So it is not for you attending here this evening. So we'll have a detailed summary of our charrettes and public engagement. We'll be working to create a conceptual design based on the feedback that you give us today, and then come up with some recommendations such as zoning and resilience strategies and next steps. So the focus groups that we worked with, we had about over 30 participants. We divided those into land-based businesses and institutions. So these included the Sweetster businesses in the Sweetster building, the churches, Winslow House, the Island Creek buildings, the campus and the buildings, in the Historical Society. And then we did a focus group with water-based businesses, so Duxbury Bay Maritime School, commercial boaters, fishermen, etc., shell fishermen. And then we worked with residents. So we invited over 84 residents, I believe, in the area to come and have a conversation about what flooding does mean for them for Snug Harbor. And we'll talk about a little bit at the end. I'll show you some of the results of those stakeholder groups. This is our schedule. We're reaching the end. This project needs to be completed by December 31st. So we're on track to get the public survey. We'll wrap up in about a week or 2 after this meeting. We'll summarize all those details and put the plan together. So now we're going to talk about the problems that we know from the analysis that we've performed, and some solutions we know from our expertise in the field and what other cities, countries, globally and locally have done to start building resiliency in their harbors and their communities. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is coastal storm flooding today. And many of you are familiar with the coastal storm flooding. In fact, a gentleman I was speaking with earlier was just showed me pictures of the King High Tide last week, and I gasped. So I need those pictures for this study, if you can send those to me. So I think many of you are probably aware of the flooding that happens during an extreme storm event, and we've had many. So what we're looking at on this map here is the FEMA National Flood Hazard Layer. The light blue areas are the 1% annual chance storm. So that's a storm that has a 1% chance of happening in any given year. The purple area is what's called a VE zone. So again, it has a chance it's categorized as a high energy zone. So you're having more intense wave energy here. And it's also the likelihood of flooding to occur in this zone is to happen at least once in a 30-year mortgage. And then 26 once in a 30-year mortgage. So the orange area is the 0.2% annual chance storm, not a storm that we see all that frequently, one that could happen at a 0.2 chance at any period of time in the year. So we can see that, March of 2018 is a good example of a 1% annual chance storm. This is actually a photo from your Duxbury Fire Chief, or your Harbor Master, excuse me. I follow both on Twitter because they do great pictures. So this is from a storm Stella, and we can see the flooding that's coming over into MAPC. So this is a great photo I received from Jake, the Harbor Master, and this is during Winter Storm Riley, which happened in March 2018. So we can see the extent of flooding that's occurred. So when we think about the problems that we're trying to solve, we have one right today. We don't even have to think about the future. This could happen at any point in time. So we want to think about, the assets that are already underwater just in the flood zone. So we are looking at the Harbor Master, Line Point Marine, Mattakesett, DBMS, Bayside Marine, etc. However, we do work with scientists to try and understand what the sea level rise projections are looking like. There are a number of things that occur to create sea level rise, and I thought I might just spend a moment to talk about that. So the first is that our oceans are warming, and warm water takes up more space. So the ocean is just taking up more space. The second component is that we have glaciers melting at an accelerated rate, so we're adding more water into the system. So those are the two major components of sea level rise that we're starting to see with those trends. There are other two components that cause sea level rise on a nominal point, but one that should be made is land subsidence. So in our previous glaciation, our landward side was heavy under the glaciers. The land is now rebounding, which is making the coastal areas sink a little bit. So it's nominal, but it still affects sea level rise. And the third, it has to do with magnetic pull, and I'm just going to say I'll email you more information about that. However, we have looked at a number of different models. There's a number of different models on sea level rise. Again, as I mentioned, Woods whole group is doing really the most sophisticated and most accurate model to date. But we do have some information that really represents the possibilities here in Duxbury Bay. So the Boston Harbor flood risk model is similar to was performed by Woods whole group. This is specific to Boston Harbor. However, it is a similar model that will be performed here for Duxbury. So what we're looking at in 2030 is about 8 inches of additional sea level rise from our mean high water. By mid to late century, up to 3 feet. By the end of the century, 7 feet. In 2013, Kleinfelder did a sea level rise study with the towns of Duxbury, Marshfield, and Scituate. So I wanted to present those results for you as well. That's based on what's called a bathtub model, and that's a model that's been performed by NOAA and what NOAA uses all around the U.S. for doing sea level rise projections. So as you can see, we're looking at very similar numbers, 8 inches by 2030, and towards the end of the century, up towards 7 feet. And then most recently, the Northeast Climate Science Center from UMass Amherst did a model that was really sophisticated based on the data of the Boston tide gauge, which is the closest tide gauge for Duxbury. We're looking at close to 8 inches at 2030 and over 7 feet by 2100. And I would like to mention that in the last 100 years, we have seen over 11 inches of sea level rise happen already. So what does that look like for Snug Harbor? And I know these might be very difficult to see, so we did blow up these maps, and you can take a look in the back when you have a chance. So we're looking at 2038, and it's not too bad. I think the things that are most significant concern is the flooding associated with the Bluefish River. So we're starting to see up behind the churches and the Winslow House, we're seeing those ponds fill up a little bit more. Long Point Marine is a really low spot, and we're seeing some flooding happening there. So this is in 2038. This is not during a storm. This is during a normal sunny day, and these numbers are looking at the mean high water mark. So I apologize for the white in the ocean there. The white in the bay doesn't actually mean anything except that I couldn't figure out how to get that layer off of there when I made this map. But so when we look at 2088, I thought it was really important to take a pull and look out at the interconnectedness of how the different landforms around Snug Harbor are important in ascertaining the extent and the severity of sea level rise in Snug Harbor. So we can see that, particularly around Sakewish, we have some trouble. Duxbury Beach actually does not, on a normal day, is not overtopping, but when we look at a storm, it does overtop and it does breach. But right now, just at a normal day in 2088, according to this model, we're not seeing overtopping, but we are seeing that it is very slim. And then the Great Marsh, obviously we're seeing much more significant flooding there as well. So what does that mean? As we zoom into Snug Harbor, we're seeing much more extensive flooding and at greater depths. So Long Point Marines, over between 1 and 1.5 feet. Bayside Marine has depths between 0.5 foot and 2 feet in different locations. We're seeing, again, in the Bluefish River towards the left, up over 5 feet from the tidal influence. So these are really important to take a look at. So now I'd like to draw my colleague Josh up here to talk about what some of the potential solutions are for that.
Thank you, Darcy. Good evening, everybody. So enough about the problems. Let's talk some about the solutions, right? And some of the possibilities for what could happen moving forward. We've done a few things to think about that, because it's not just a technical problem that we're solving, but the reason you're here and important to be involved in this process is because it's solutions that you need to be behind and supportive of, because they'll take some effort on in a number of ways. So to seed that conversation, we've come up with an inventory of possible solutions, looking at solutions that have been applied locally around the world, and there's pretty well-defined set of ideas, an inventory of which we've divided into 3 sort of geographic locations of those solutions. So there's solutions that can happen out in the water, so you don't even have to have them in Snug Harbor potentially, but they could have an impact, and we'll go through what a number of those are. There's solutions that can happen right on that coastal edge, so the edge where the water is meeting the land at that bulkhead edge or whatever that edge may be. And then there's solutions that happen on the land side of things, so elevating buildings and the like. So those are 3 geographic locations of solutions, and then beyond that we've divided that inventory into the types of solutions. So that's what you see under each of those different categories. So for open ocean solutions, you either have fortification, so building up barriers, or wave or other types of attenuation to reduce energy of the ocean. On the coastal edge, there's again fortification and attenuation techniques, but also elevated techniques. So you're seeing things like seawalls that need to be elevated, or other elevated edges like park systems on a coastal edge. And I'll have examples of some of those. And then land elevation, where you have some of those same techniques, fortification, elevation, and then also ideas like accommodating water, letting water in, working with water, or migration as well is a technique that's been used as well. Getting critical or unnecessarily sort of water adjacent uses out of the way of water. There are things that have to be next to the water, and of course those are a different matter. So we're putting these forward and have located them generally on this diagram of where those different inventory of solutions would be applied. It may be some combination of these solutions in the end, but a big part of what we're looking for this evening is your feedback on this inventory about where your preferences would be if a number of these were applied. And there's some of these which you might think are really bad ideas, so we wouldn't want to have that be a part of the technical solutions. We've also looked at this inventory in terms of the potential investment that's involved, and these are generalized relative investments to one another. You can imagine that a ocean-based barrier is potentially much more expensive than some of the other solutions that I outlined in that type of inventory. And then each of them has a differential in terms of their impact, environmental impact, the impact on the functions of the harbor or the water, how people are accessing the water, etc. And so there are a number of pluses and minuses to each of these approaches that we're keeping mindful of and weighing against your preferences as well. And then also there are a number of things which each of these inventories do or don't address in the problems that Darcy has just outlined for us. So wave attenuation, for example, it'll deaden wave energy, but it will float as high as the water rises. So it's not going to help you in a sea level rise scenario, whereas other types of solutions would. So we're tracking through all of those, and I think this gets a little difficult to tread through. So to help you understand what some of these are, we have some case study examples to walk through what this may mean on the ground. So, and these are going through the case studies in each of those three main geographic categories. So starting off with a water-based example. Many of you may know of the New Bedford Hurricane Protection Barrier. It's a very well-known example. I think it's I've seen a few references. It might be the largest in the Northeast, largest on the eastern seaboard, but it's a big hurricane barrier, and it's a big deal. It was created in 1966, finished in 1966 at a cost of $18.6 million. And it's an example of ocean fortification that's protecting vast resources in densely developed areas that are a part of the New Bedford and Fairhaven Harbor. It protects about 1,400 acres of densely populated area, and it protects New Bedford's fishing port, which as at least a number of years ago was the number one in the country in terms of revenue, mostly because of the scalloping industry. So there was a lot of good reason to build this barrier. That 1966 cost, of $18.6 million translated into 2019 dollars is $155 million investment to make that happen. Thank you, Valerie.
Can I dive in for just a second?
Sure.
Can I interrupt you? Hi, Ashki apologizes for being late. I just wanted to jump in. I'm double booked tonight. I have to go upstairs for a few minutes for the Finance Committee. But just in case you break out while I'm upstairs, I just want to share with you that we're going to continue this dialogue. And the reason that we're starting out talking to you is because every process I've ever worked on that has to do with planning gets better with more heads involved. And people from the community know a lot more about the community than folks who come in and work that live elsewhere. So we're looking for a team approach, and it's really important to have all of you at the table. And I'm really pleased to have the cooperation, the turnout that I see tonight, and I look forward to continuing the dialogue. This is just the beginning. And like I say, we're planning. We're way ahead of this game, and the goal here is to figure out what are the good solutions and give ourselves lots of time to plan ahead rather than waiting for the storm to hit. So I'm going to duck upstairs, but I'll be back. Thanks.
Thank you, Valerie. So continuing with a few more facts about the New Bedford Hurricane Barrier. So in addition to that initial capital cost, the barrier is associated with $400,000 to $600,000 a year on New Bedford's side of things in terms of operational costs. And then that doesn't include major maintenance projects as well. It was constructed by the Army Corps of Engineers and is maintained biannually by the Army Corps. The system involves over 3.5 miles, of which that 3.5 mile system, the most iconic is this water-based barrier, which is just over a mile itself. And at the center of that barrier is a 150-foot wide gate, which you can see at the center there, to allow the fishing and port operations to continue. They are currently analyzing this barrier system in light of the continuing knowledge and research regarding sea level rise, just to make sure that this investment stays relevant and sort of fortified into the future, given those potentially changing conditions. So this is one approach that is has its pluses and minuses. Another approach is a little closer neighbor, Hingham. And this is an example of the coastal adaptation category. So Hingham Harbor, not Hingham Shipyard, but Hingham Harbor, which is just off of 3A, they have undertaken incremental investments to improve their coastal edge and elevate coastal edges, mostly through the guidance of the Hingham Harbor Development Committee. And they completed a master plan in 2007, which was more generally about use and functionality and amenity of the Hingham Harbor area. And then in 2015 completed a resilience assessment with Kleinfelder, who Darcy had mentioned, a consultant engineering firm, and have acted upon that 2015 resilience study really in impressive ways. And now they've elevated wharfs. So you can see a little bit in this picture, the wharf that you see immediately to the right has been recently reconstructed, and in the process of that, elevated to account for sea level rise conditions. And that's compared to, they have 3 wharfs, and one of the wharfs to the left there in this image has not been elevated. So you can see the difference there, and in the process they're building up the pedestrian and coastal amenities as well to make it more of an attraction. They've also created a harbor walk, which has been a part of these incremental improvements, and as they've put in the harbor walk, actually elevated, both with building up the topography and with this stone wall, that edge to also account for potential water flow directions that would be coming and associated with those tidal changes. And then they've been doing work on, they have a small bathing beach, public beach there, that they have a part of their Hingham Harbor area. And underneath this dune area, they've actually built an engineered seawall, so it's buried underneath the sand. And then they've elevated the whole area and are also working on parking lot improvements, a concession stand and sort of bathhouse area, and done all sorts of, I think, improvements that have synergies with both resiliency, improving those coastal conditions, but also improving that Hingham Harbor area as an attraction unto itself. Many of these efforts have been funded by grants from the Seaport Council, that's headed by the Lieutenant Governor, the Coastal Resilience grants from CZM, Coastal Zone Management, and then also from the town's own CPC, the Community Preservation Committee funding, which Duxbury has as well. And here's another image of the armor stone wall that has been a part of those improvements along that coastal edge as well. So they're doing a number of different incremental investments that, once completed together, form a really strong barrier at that edge. Everyone that starts to talk about these conversations inevitably will mention the Dutch at some point. The Dutch have been really global pioneers in dealing with coastal conditions. About a third of the country is under sea level, so they've recognized that many decades ago and have been dealing with it in a very engineering focused way. But they also have sort of approached it from a process of letting the water in, sort of one of the conceptual theories behind the way they take it on. And you can see in this image here, the scale, of course, is very different from Snug Harbor, and this is a massive project and undertaking. But it's an illustration of the approach that they take, where you have, in the Rhine Delta area particularly, they've allowed water to flow into areas where it wouldn't have previously because it's becoming such an issue, and have done things like done major migration out of those water channeling areas, and then done pretty massive engineering projects to support that. And then in the process of doing so, have created amenities and river and coastal edges that are accessible and occupiable when the flood and water isn't present. So they're trying to create and build up that network of connected places that are attractive to people. And then a little closer to home, and this is into that land-based strategy and solution now. So recently completed, just adjacent to the Children's Museum, is a climate resilient park that the city of Boston has put together. And this is the Martin Richard Park, a celebration of the youngest victim of the marathon bombings. And the park itself, this area next to the Children's Museum, was identified as one of the flood pathways into the Seaport District, a critical location, as many of you know, of major investment recently. So you don't necessarily want that area getting inundated at a high tide. This is one of those points of potential inundation. So the park itself was designed, the biggest resilient feature of it was literally lifting the land up and elevating it so that it would block water at that edge. So you can see along the 4-point channel that comes in, and this is Congress Street here, so the Children's Museum would be to your left. That park is elevated substantially, a good story or two actually, enough so that they've put some parking actually underneath the park itself because they've lifted the park up so much. They do have one weak point still, the bridge area that you can see in the middle, and then that would be plugged with temporary flood barriers when it's needed. So they would bring out deployable barriers which would be mechanically fastened and put in place and watertight. So those are potential solutions that you can look at. And in the process of doing this resilient feature, it's also an attraction unto itself. You can imagine a solution like this potentially at a smaller scale happening in and around Snug Harbor that could become an attraction or amenity that people are using on a daily basis. And then it's also providing that protection. So with that, I'll hand it over back to Darcy, and we'll look into your ideas about what those solutions mean.
Thanks, Josh. So one other thing I think is a little bit hard to illustrate, though, is one of the solutions that we do want to bring forward as well, though one, of course, very difficult to talk about, is thinking about when do we make decisions about moving infrastructure out of harm's way with storms and sea level rise. So managed retreat or rolling easements. So that is one of those concepts that we can consider. We are talking with a number of communities about where are those places that maybe we should think about moving some component of Snug Harbor so it stays a very vibrant economic and community gathering place into the future as well. So when we talk about so many recommendations and we talk about retreat and migration, in the categories you'll be talking and voting on later on in the evening, those are some of the things that we wanted to consider if you want to consider them, but I did want to put that out there. Rolling easements is a really great idea, and I want to credit JR for thinking about this, if that's okay, JR, but this is a mechanism under which you're making a commitment to continue to live and stay in your place, but at some point in time, into the future, when the harm actually is at your doorstep, then there's the opportunity to do buyouts. The other thing I want to mention is that even though a number of these options do absolutely have a cost associated, both a capital cost for the infrastructure improvement, as well as a maintenance and operation cost, as well as in commercial fishing industry costs or a natural ecosystem industry cost, things of those natures. So, however, we do want to, we are very strong in considering the economic components of these based on your priorities that you'll be identifying in a moment. And that a number of these solutions can be funded with various grant programs. So it's not that there will be no cost to Duxbury, but it's not that Duxbury has to take on the burden of all of those costs. So at this point, we're done talking. We'll have a chance to take questions just in a few moments. But I'd love if you have a cell phone and you might be interested in joining us in doing some polling so we can get some feedback and share your experiences with us. Please take out your cell phone. If you didn't bring a cell phone or if you're not interested in texting, you'll be on the back of your agenda. There is the survey questions that we'll be asking, so you can fill those out on the back of your sheet.
If you need an agenda item, hand you it.
So if you're going to send a text, send it to 22333. That's the person you're sending it to. 22333, that's it. And then in the message box of your text, please type MAPC MTG, all caps. Your own messaging fees may apply, though I don't know why it says that. I don't think there are any extra fees associated with this. So do we have any success yet? People have hooked up? You should get a text back confirming that you've joined our meeting. And Christian can help folks too if anyone's having trouble. Any problems? We're good? Okay, great. So, there we go. Definitely. So how urgent do you feel coastal flooding issues are? So you can type A for being not that important, and E being most urgent.
Excuse me,
Yes.
are we going to discuss any of these before people choose their?
Yes, we are. This is really just to get a little bit of feedback on what you think the problem is, the challenges and the strengths of Snug Harbor are. And before we vote on some of the solutions, we'll have a discussion. Okay, so it looks like we have about half of you saying moderately to less urgent. And about half are saying more urgent to most urgent. Okay, that's an interesting spread. Do we have anyone else still waiting to answer? Or can we move on to the next question? Okay, so what's working well in Snug Harbor? You can just type your answer. I believe this is a word cloud, so you could do 1 or 2 words, but this is one of those ones you would keep kind of short. So some of the things that we heard is that there's a real strong community, there's a lot of festivals, people really feel that Snug Harbor is the heart of the community, really good businesses there, diverse businesses work really well together. All right, industry. So when you see a word that's larger, that means there's multiple responses of that word. Moorings, access, launch, view. Outdoor water. Duxbury Yacht Club, is that DOIC? Businesses. Community. Open. Hub. Fishing, recreational activities, business, boating, fishing, French, memories, yay. I agree.
I didn't do that.
I see bread too. Oystering, oysters, great. These are awesome. Okay, we have anyone still working on this? All right, we'll move on to the next question. So what's not working so well today? I could give you some hints, but I'm sure you probably can think of that. Parking is the number one we've heard so far. Flooding, great. Congestion. So we're seeing social is not working well. Government's not working well at Snug Harbor. Sidewalks. Access. Biking and walking, I agree. Safety. Cycling. Traffic. Okay, these are great. And these sound a lot like what we've been seeing in our other. Ooh, restrooms aren't working. That's not good. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Those are great answers. So when you think about Snug Harbor and the risks that you face with flooding, either today with coastal storms, nor'easters and blizzards, or with sea level rise in the future, what is the absolute most important thing that needs to be there in Snug Harbor in the future? So this is what is most important for the future of Snug Harbor. I'm going to say too much government is probably for the previous question. Yes, we'll make note of that.
So is Metakeesit Narrow.
Not Metakeesit Narrow yet.
But that's probably important for the future too.
Business, public access, retail options, oysters. So again, if it's big, it means it's being replicated. Dining and recreation, parking, recreation. Metakeesit widened. More dredging. Boating. MAPC, all right. You're going to invite us back to Snug Harbor. Keeping history. That's a great one. We've heard that before too. Pedestrian cycle connectivity. All right, we'll move on. Those are excellent answers. Thank you. Just a couple more. Hang in there. So what should be done collectively as a community, as a town, to protect Snug Harbor? And here we're kind of looking from your level of interest in making investments as a community to protect Snug Harbor. So very little, it's a lost cause, or everything, save it all at all cost. So strategic investments that have multiple benefits is where we're coming in. All right, that's a great spread. And I think this is our last question. So what would you personally be willing to do to protect Snug Harbor? Would you, everything, flesh out all of those investments and raise your house and help your neighbor? Or will not spend my money? All right, looks like it's slowing down. So we have, would make substantial investments and continually evaluate cost and benefit. Those are great for the majority. All right, so let me get back to my presentation. So I thought I'd just share with you some of the focus group responses. So word cloud. So the thumbs up is what's working in Snug Harbor. So agriculture, people, business, community, being together, the town, DBMS are some of the answers. there we go. What's not working, the thumbs down, Washington Street, the beach, reservation, congestion, it's frightening.
Oyster's not working?
Yeah, so there's more context to those words, so we'll have that in a better detail. This is just a snapshot. So we look at what absolutely needs to be there in the future: the beach, the waterfront, shorebirds, the bay, DBMS, farmers, oyster farmers, access, boat business, agriculture. And just some of the focus group's responses in terms of the types of strategies they were looking for to create more resilience in Snug Harbor. Most of them were, this is divided by the focus group in the color. So the green are the land-based businesses and retail for an institution. The blue is water-based businesses and institution, and the purple are residents. So the majority are looking at land elevation as the best strategy, and the second being harbor attenuation, with more their preference being more natural features like creating oyster reefs, net living shorelines, and building up salt marshes.
What was that, oyster reefs?
Yeah, so some communities are actually building offshore oyster reefs as a wave attenuation strategy to minimize the wave energy coming into harbors. So they're effectively I don't know if we have a picture on there, do we? We don't. I'll bring up a picture on the internet, but they're effectively like a metal cage-like base that gets filled in with shells, and then there's an expert here who probably tell you exactly how that works, and it's not me. But that is being used in some, like in the Gulf Coast, for example, and over by Florida and then the Carolinas. They're testing that out as a more natural strategy as opposed to sticking really large cement blocks into your ocean system. It does minimize the wave energy, but it doesn't protect against sea level rise. All right, this is our mooring. So as promised, we'd love to take your questions and have a discussion. And after we do complete that discussion, I'll just point out, we have 3 different stations, one in this corner by Josh, one by the middle wall, and one in the back corner. And each of those contains both a close-up map of Snug Harbor and a zoomed-out map of Snug Harbor in the maps. And then on the left are the strategies, some of the solutions that we talked about or Josh talked about earlier. And those are color-coded to pins, and we have pins. So what we would be really interested in doing after we have our conversation is to have you actually pick your top 3, is it 3 or 4 pins, and put your strategies. I'm sorry, what was it, 3? 3. Christian says 3. Okay. Pick 3 pins based on that color code of your best preference and put them in the location where you think is most important for Snug Harbor. So, but at this point now, I'd love to have any questions or any discussions or anything clarification. Yes?
In some of these plans, is this assuming the integrity of the barrier beach? Meaning that there would not be a breach such as we've had in the past? So if there were, not just overtopping, but a breach, would that change the equation?
So one, I think we can guarantee a breach is going to happen during a coastal storm. So with sea level rise on a calm day, what our projections are showing that Duxbury Beach, because it's very narrow, but it's not completely overtopped. That said, beaches and shorelines are always changing with various processes of erosion accretion. It's very likely or possible, I won't say likely, but it is possible that Duxbury Beach breaches and remains breached. If that were the case, then yes, you would have that VE zone that you saw in that first map would be extending more into Snug Harbor, where you have high energy waves heading more into your infrastructure, as opposed to now you're seeing some waves associated with the storm inundation and the winds, but you're actually not getting slammed by waves as your neighboring town Situate is. Yes?
There hasn't been any mention of the wastewater infrastructure. Is that too specific for tonight's program?
No, that's a great question. So we did take a look at that in your climate vulnerability assessment. And there's certainly a concern about wastewater treatment plants, particularly and with sea level rise. The water doesn't just go over the land. You have very highly drained soils, excessively drained soils in the town of Duxbury in many areas. So the water is also going to go through the land. In addition to increasing precipitation, you'll have higher water tables. Both of those conditions, whether you're coastal or inland, make the efficacy of a on-site wastewater treatment system.
I'm talking about the pumps in Snug Harbor.
Oh, so the pumps in Snug Harbor actually, and Jake's still here, but the pump actually is in the back of MAPC, and it has already been raised up. And so during Winter Storm Riley, and Jake, please correct me if I'm wrong, but during Winter Storm Riley, our last 2018 storms, those were not affected. So they are storm resilient today. Did you want to add anything? Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah?
Are there any solutions that are kind of the opposite of the retreat, where in building new sort of park or raised areas along the coast, is it on the table, or is it possible to move it out 10, 20 feet into the harbor? You lose area in the harbor, but you potentially create more space for businesses and parking and things like that. So is there something that takes that off the table right from the day one, that you cannot build out into existing harbor area?
That's an awesome question. So first thing I like to tell communities when I work with them on climate change is, Snug Harbor is so awesome because you have access to the water, right? That's the basis of your businesses there and your recreation in the heart of community. So we're going to have more water. And it's important to consider water as being an asset that could grow into your harbor. So how do you learn to live with it? So Josh showed a picture of this massive, thing in the Netherlands where they created another stream. We wouldn't go to that route, but the point there is using more of that water to increase the asset of Snug Harbor, and it's complicated. So the answer to your question is yes. The Netherlands is also doing more floating houses, so in which case sea level rise doesn't matter, they just are floating up. So there's other strategies happening in Europe where they're thinking about that component. That said, to develop in the water is very difficult from a regulatory approach. And I think the regulations have not quite caught up to the realities before us. So it'd be a huge obstacle to try to institute something of that nature right now. Yes, the gentleman in the back.
Answering the first question, it seems as though you dismissed out of hand treating the beach as an engineered structure and raising the beach to keep up so it does not breach.
Yes, I apologize. I moved on too quickly to the next individual. So the reason why we zoomed out is because I hope that you will all consider the beach as a very important asset to protecting Snug Harbor, and investments can be made to your beach to ensure that breach doesn't happen. So I apologize that I didn't make that clear earlier, but it absolutely is an asset that is worth maintaining and sustaining as a protective barrier to Snug Harbor. Sure, go ahead.
An associated question. We're going to have to develop funding vehicles analogous to industrial revenue bonds for localities and states to deal with sea level rise mitigation. And that is a state and federal problem, but the support for developing those instruments has to start at the local level. So it's a political opportunity for Duxbury.
That's excellent. And I do want to mention that we have a mooring off in the back. It's just a blank slate. There are multiple sheets. So if there's anything that I missed or other components and points that you want to add to this, please do feel free to write your comments such as that. That would be a great addition to the study to think about. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
I read an article about some of the communities along the shore. Plymouth is actually doing this. is taking some of its land and allowing the extra water to, I mean, just using open space to deal with the extra water. I don't know how you engineer that, but is that a possibility?
Right, the Town Brook in downtown Plymouth, is that what you're speaking of? I think it's Town Brook, I should know that because I'm working with Plymouth now. But there's absolutely a lot of communities, and I always make those kinds of recommendations. A lot of our rivers, the mouths of our rivers get filled with sediment, so they're not as effective at the flow of water. We're also seeing quite a bit of invasive species. So the Town Brook, for example, although I'm not sure that's the name of it, but the brook in Plymouth that was just re-engineered was a combination of dredging and ecological restoration, so it's improving the flow and managing flooding. So that is a great example, as well as creating, as Josh was describing, a really important amenity to downtown Plymouth. So you can walk along this beautiful park that goes, down to some other historic assets, to the mill down there. So it's increasing that tourist destination aspect of downtown Plymouth. That's a great example. So you are welcome to talk to Christian and myself and Josh. If you have any other further questions you want to do offline, you can certainly respond to Christian if your other follow-up emails that you want to send to us, since he's probably, or myself, of course, as well. But at this point, we'd love to have you find your pins, and Christian and Josh and I will be over at the stations to help describe some of this, help you walk through voting on your solutions with your pins. And so thank you so much again for coming here tonight. I know it's a lot to come out on an evening, but you're driving the solutions to protect your community is critically important. So we really value your feedback and your participation. So thank you.
Darcy,
I will also say, if you filled out the back of your agenda,